that's when I was like, oh, wait a second. I actually need to figure out how to recreate the cash flow piece, right? The equity is great, but if you're only flipping every 9, 10, 12 months, 24 months, that's a little bit difficult to predict.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. My name is Marta Seslak, and I'm your host. Today, I'm super duper excited about our guest, Whitney Elkins-Hutten. And Whitney is definitely crushing it. She is the Director of Investor Education at PassiveInvesting.com. She is the co-author of the international #1 bestseller, Resilient Women in Life and Business. She is the host of the Passive Investing Made Simple and Multifamily Investor Nation YouTube shows. And she's also a partner in $800 million in real estate, including residential units, car washes, and self-storage units in 11 different states. So welcome, Whitney. We are super excited to talk to you today and learn about your journey. So let's dive right into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. Well, Marta, first of all, thanks for having me on. This is going to be fun. We were chatting a little bit before the show, and I'm just super excited to help out the audience where I can, because I think, hearing people's stories is really empowering to kind of meet people where they're at and help them, get to their goals. So for me, I'm currently the Director of Investor Education here at PassiveInvesting.com. And as you kind of read my bio, we focus primarily on private equity deals in multifamily, self-storage, express car washes, first position lien real estate debt. But that's not where I started. I actually don't have a degree in real estate at all. I started off in 2002 completely as an accidental landlord. And at the time, I bought a house with a significant other. And then about a month after we bought the house together, my relationship fell apart. Now, when I say bought the house together, I was funding the whole transaction and securing the loan, and my partner was going to do the rehab on the house. He had those skills, and that's what he was bringing to the table. And my job at the time is I was working as a CDC facilitator for education and training on a bioterrorism grant in Wyoming. So my job was to drive all over the state of Wyoming and northern part of Colorado and train public health nurses and physicians how to identify smallpox and anthrax and different chemical, radiological, and biological events. But I was pretty specifically focused on anthrax and smallpox, and train them how to identify it, treat it, vaccinate against it. And long story short, that I had always wanted to go into infectious disease public health. I saw the movie Outbreak as a kid, and I was like, that's it. I want to be Renee Russo in Outbreak, minus getting sick. That was not on my plate there. So, I realized at that time that there was no way that I was going to be able to focus on building my own wealth while spending that much time traveling. I mean, I was saving the world, but I couldn't save myself, it felt like. And so we bought this house. The relationship falls apart, and now I feel like completely crushed because I have everything under my own name, all the bills. And so I kind of panicked a little bit, and I stuffed the house full of roommates and who were paying rent. And then they didn't mind living in a construction zone. So, mind you, YouTube didn't exist back then in 2002. And, they helped me do the rehab on the house, sand floors, hang drywall, do electrical plumbing, some of the things we probably shouldn't have been doing ourselves. And long story short, 11 months later, I flipped the house and made a significant profit on it. But I also hadn't been paying for my own expenses. And so, I mean, I really love telling the story because that's when I sold that house, it's probably my number one investing mistake. But at the same time, I had to commit that mistake to actually prove to myself that I can create value outside of my job that's disconnected from how much time I'm trading. And that's, I was completely bitten by the real estate bug. Now, I never saw it as a career opportunity. I saw it as something ancillary to, my career in public health. And then, we fast forward several years later. I'm continuing to live and flip and house hack with my now husband. We're doing fairly well at building up buckets of equity. We're saving like mad from our day jobs, but we never could put our finger on what was missing, and that was cash flow. We needed cash flow to be able to unlock those golden handcuffs. And then, about 10 years later, somebody says, well, why don't you keep one of those flips and put a renter in it? We're like, oh, that's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? We'd both been renters before. And so we scaled a portfolio of over 30 single family rentals and still doing flipping on the side to replenish our capital. And then we hit our next ceiling of achievement when our daughter came along. I was taking care of two family members, had a little baby girl at home, and I had enough cash flow coming in. I wanted to step aside and be able to live life a little bit and, breathe, um, and focus on what I needed to do next. And that's when it hit me during that time is I'm sure other people were in similar situations like I was. I felt like I was further along in the game because I had started adding to my income, had started my equity growth, but other people had to be in the similar income where they have to work their W-2, they've got all these other obligations, and they just don't feel like they can step away and breathe and take care of themselves, put their own oxygen mask on first. And that's when I kind of it dawned on me. I'm like, this whole lack of financial education, inability to be able to grow your wealth outside of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds is a public health problem. And so I set out to help solve that problem for myself and for others.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just so excited and I want to know everything. I have so many questions for you right now. So going back to the beginning of your journey, you talked about trying to figure out how to build wealth. And how did you even know that you had to build wealth? Because, like a lot of people are socially conditioned to, okay, I go to work, I make an income. They don't think that building wealth is even a thing. And so was there something in your upbringing that taught you that wealth building is a parallel path, or how did you even know to do that?
I wouldn't say it's one thing that taught me how to do that. I mean, when I was going to college, I got straight C's in freshman chemistry, and my dad was like, well, I guess you're going to be a business major. And I'm like, no, I'm going to be a chemist. I was just very hard-headed. Anything that my dad said, you should do this, I did the complete opposite. And I'm sure he used that reverse psychology on me several times. But I say that in jest because about this time, like in 2002, my father also felt very ill. And part of the reason why I was like, really struggling for time freedom, and it wasn't so much that I was struggling that I knew that I needed to build this massive amount of net worth. That was not ever what I was striving for. What I was striving for was the time freedom, the ability to have enough cash coming in from other places. We call that passive income now. But to where I could go home and be with my father. My father was ailing, and here I was traveling 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I had tons of PTO accrued, and I couldn't use it to go home to see him. And, he himself had been, I watched him scale his whole life with, as the VP of sales with a oil supply company. I wouldn't say it cost him his family, but his work, because he was around him so much, it was like family. And, when he came home to us, it was a little challenging, a little rough at times. Long story short, he worked so hard to provide for his family that when it came time for him to really, retire and step away and enjoy his family, his health wasn't there. And he died soon after that. And he was completely robbed in that situation. And I don't mean to say that and to give his power away or anything like that. I'm just saying that I saw this whole thing go down. I'm like, that's not going to be me. Like, I'm going to figure this out. Either I'm going to get the financial independence, or I'm going to figure out to have the quote unquote balance now. because I just couldn't see myself repeating the same mistakes that, the same situation my father had been in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an interesting perspective. And you know, I think for me, I've had the same experience with my parents just working their tails off and spending a crazy amount of hours at work just to kind of make ends meet and provide for the family. And I guess like coming out of that similar perspective to yours, which is like, I don't want that life, right? Like I want to actually spend time with my kids as they're growing up. So yeah, totally get that. Um,
I mean, if you think about it too, my mom passed away just a few years ago, and she, even after seeing what happened with my father, she repeated the same mistakes. She was so close to retirement, and I think passed away like 2 months into retirement.
wow.
Didn't get to have that opportunity either. And a long story short, it's not uncommon. This is not an uncommon situation that we have here in the United States, and I think that's really a failing of, I think, our educational system, and not so much public health education, but like our financial or our family educational system, our public education system, to really help people understand, how does money work, right? How do you create wealth? How do you keep it? How do you grow it? How do you pass it on? How to prioritize, things in life, and keep them in balance in relation to each other.
The other thing you mentioned is interesting. When you got started in real estate, it sounded like your goals were a little bit different, and then as the journey continued on, they changed it along the way. So I think you mentioned you were focused on equity, and then realized, wait a minute, we need some cash flow. So help me understand your thought process and what changed along the way.
Yeah, so what changed along the way was we actually defined our goals. Okay, because at the very beginning, I didn't really have my goals defined. Remember, I stumbled into this property and then I was like, oh, snap, I'm going to get crushed by cash flow or the lack of it, right? But what I ended up coming out on the other end is that I was enamored by that check that I got at the closing table. But it was about a week or two afterwards because so how I bought the property to begin with is I didn't have the down payment. So I went to my grandfather and I asked for a $7,000 loan for the down payment. Now, he had to gift it to me and sign a piece of paper saying in the bank that I didn't owe it to him back. And I was like, I'm going to pay you back. And actually, I paid him back 2 weeks after. I actually took out the loan because I took out a home equity line of credit. This was the wild west of lending. I was 103% leveraged on this house by the time it was all said and done. But when I sold the property, I'm settling out all the financial statements. Because I had to file my taxes for the IRS, because I took advantage of what they call the 121 exclusion. So I could take 250,000 of that, up to $250,000 tax free of capital gain. Okay. So I'm doing all this math. I had to back out the loan, right? Because there's 7,000 that I didn't have to like pay to the IRS. So I'm figuring out all this, and I was like, wait a second. It wasn't just the $52,000 check at the closing table. I also hadn't, because my roommates had been paying rent, I actually been making money every single month because they were paying to rent the room and for utilities on top of it. And I was like, wait a second. I had eliminated my housing bill too. And, in hindsight, I could, somebody who had planned to do this would have known it. For me, I was just trying to like put a Band-Aid on the bleeding, right? The hemorrhaging that I thought was happening. And that's when I was like, oh, wait a second. I actually need to figure out how to recreate the cash flow piece, right? The equity is great, but, if you're only flipping every 9, 10, 12 months, 24 months, that's a little bit difficult to predict. Okay. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm way better about it now, but like back then, my 20s, somebody hands me a $50,000 check, it's like gone, right? Like it's not sticking around for very long. Um, so anyways, so it was as our vocabulary changed, what we truly, once we started actually identifying our goals, we could then change our vocabulary. And when we changed our vocabulary, then we could understand why we wanted things, and then who did we need to become in order to get those things. I mean, the what do you want? Why do you want it? Who do you need to become to get it? I have a framework now. I didn't have that framework back then. And so that's where I think it's amazing, because with back in 2002, like, you would go get on the internet, and I don't know if you remember, some of us still had dial-up internet, right? You didn't go find an answer super fast. That just didn't happen. Like, now you can whip out your phone. My little niece was in town over the weekend. She was like, I've got a box in my pocket, and she's like finding the answer to like whatever she wants right then and there. It's such an amazing world that we live in now, and times have changed. So anyways, to answer your question, it was really having that vocabulary, learning that vocabulary and learning that framework over time that helped us get closer to our goals. And I think that's where a lot of why I'm so passionate about the education side is because it's easy. People listening here, I just gave you a framework for you to set your goals to. And if you didn't have like that 3-question framework, right? And we can go over it again, you might be struggling for a year, 2, 5 years until you like stumbled across a good way to set your goals. So what do you want? Why do you want it? Who do you need to become to get it? And whenever you answer that question, who do you need to become to get it? Think about your mindsets, your skills, and your networks that you need to have in place in order to achieve that goal.
That's so good. That's so good. I want to stick on the point around the why, because I think that's very important. And I know that when I had my first son, my why started morphing and evolving into something totally foreign. That was foreign to me at the time. And now I have a lot more clarity on it after having 2 kids. But, I think the trend is like, before you have kids, you work your butt off, you work 60 plus hours at your W-2 job, and that's considered normal. And then when you have kids, there's like, and even a good friend of mine went through the same transition. Like, there's a switch that flips in your mind to say, wait a minute, I want to actually spend time with my kid, right? Like, I want the flexibility, the freedom of time to be able to manage my own schedule and create my own schedule. So talk a little bit about the why and how it's evolved for you.
Yeah, definitely. And when we talk about whys, and this is how I experience it, and a lot of the people that I work with experience it, is the initial why is it's a pain, right? Humans are more naturally motivated by pain than they are by pleasure, oddly enough, right? I can tell you, if I talk to somebody, I can tell who's going to achieve their goals in a short time period, because if they have a pain associated with it that they're trying to solve, they're going to be more motivated, right? It's the rock in the shoe. It's the pea in the like, pea in the bed. And I mean, like, if you guys are watching the videos, I'm talking about the legume pea in the bed. Okay. It's the annoyance, the thorn in the side, right? But that's not what will sustain you long term. So we have to be able to look at the pain and associate it to the actual North Star. What is it you're trying to go? What are you trying to achieve? And usually that boils down to one of 5 freedoms. I mean, I can tell you, when I talk to somebody, it's going to be a combination of 1 or 2 or all of the 5 freedoms in life that they're trying to achieve. So pains are going to look like, I have bills that I have to pay. I have to take, my family on vacation. I don't want to have to afford a nanny. I want to be able to have enough cash flow coming in myself to where I can be at home with my child, right? Those are the type of pains that people are, quote unquote, running from. And that's what will keep them motivated on a daily basis, because again, it's annoying. It's going to rub a blister. It's going to cause some sort of long-term damage at some point in time. But when they can't evaluate their long-term strategy based on that pain, otherwise they end up building the wrong business. They end up setting the wrong goals, building the wrong business, acquiring the wrong real estate, right? And so they have to understand what that North Star is. For you, you're just like, I want time freedom. I want freedom of choice. I want to be at home. Maybe somebody else is, I want location freedom. Somebody else is like, I want freedom to create an impact in the world. But most of those are somewhat solved if somebody hits the milestone first of financial freedom. And so that is how I orient to the why, is really trying to understand what is my initial pain right now that I'm trying to solve, but always keeping in mind that long-term vision of what I'm trying, the why I'm trying to achieve it. Because that long-term vision will really change. That short-term pain will change pretty often, right? You might bring in the first $1,000 a month, and you feel financially secure, right? Then you've got another problem right on top of it. Maybe you peel back the layer of the onion and you're like, okay, well, I've got the first $1,000 coming in a month, but like my boss still has me traveling like 30 hours a week. I got to now solve that pain, right? And so that pain will always be a journey, but you've got to figure out that Tony Robbins has a great exercise. It's called the 7 layers of why. I think Jason, Dries has something similar too, where you start off with the pain, but you really start to uncover it, and you're going to end up with one of those 5 freedoms that you're trying to look at.
Yeah, what a great framework. That's fantastic. I love that. Awesome. Well, the other thing that, that you mentioned is it's a public health issue, and this concept of uh, education around finance. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I know both of us come from the public health background, and even though you had a little bit of a pivot from public health into real estate and education, which I love, but say more a little bit about uh, financial education being a public health issue.
Yeah, so so I'm actually in the middle of writing a book, and in my research of the book, there's tons of data to support, and not just recent data. We're talking, hundreds of years of data to support that. Um, you know, if let's just pretend a family has solved the financial education and they've built their fortune, that it's even hard for them to keep it past 3 generations, because there's generally a feeling that they lack passing on the education to their heirs, right? And usually that wealth is gone after 3 generations. We've seen it with the Vanderbilts. We've seen it with the Pulitzers, the Klugels. Like there's a multitude of families, and that's just in the United States, right? We've seen this, let's see, uh, 50 Cent, Heidi Montage, Nicolas Cage. These are all people that in the Shia LaBeouf, like their wealth, their estates have evaporated because of lack of knowledge on how to manage money. Now, some people get in trouble with taxes. They get in trouble, legal troubles, maybe like MC Hammer or somebody like that. I'm just trying to pull out some really famous names here, but some majority of the time when we see somebody erode their wealth super fast, it's going to be because of like erratic behavior, overspending, just some sort of fundamental principle that they've violated. Now, here's the thing. I mean, we can all say, "Cry me a river." Like Nicolas Cage lost his fortune, he still has some skills, he can build it back up, right? Like, why are we so sad about this? It's just that he's just one example of a much larger problem that we have in the United States. Is that there is a systemic lack of education in the school. Now, what I love about the internet is there's so much free education online. People can go to the library, pick up a book, but all of these things, have a basic failure to them, is they don't implore people or teach people how to take action upon that education. And it's really like knowledge is potential power. Scientia auctoribus est, like for people who like Latin, like knowledge is power. Actually, that quote is really wrong. It's potential power. So we need to be able to teach people, okay, great. You now have the knowledge. You now know how money works, how to create the wealth, how to keep it, how to grow it. Now let's put you in a situation, an incubator, if you will, to go out and actually create this in your world. And that takes motivation. That takes the being put in an environment where you're allowed to fail, where it's okay to fail. And I think that, we just have a real problem with that here in the United States, especially.
Yeah. Agreed. Awesome. So speaking of action, and I want to pivot maybe to a question around, what do you think allowed you to create success in everything that you've done, because you've had, some significant pivots that really, public health, there is a slight connection, to financial education but real estate, maybe not so much. So you've kind of dove right into these significant pivots. And so help us understand like what contributed to your success, and were there any doubts in your mind as you took on just these brand new spaces in your life?
Yeah. So as far as what I think contributed to my success, it's it's kind of a sliding scale, right? For me, I've always had a growth attitude. Now, the growth attitude that I had as a teenager is very different than the growth attitude I have today. I've grown my growth attitude, right? But you have to start somewhere. And, I think it's growth attitude combined with the ability to take imperfect action. And when I was younger, I was more of a perfectionist. So I focused on perfect action. As I've gotten older, now with my growth ability expanded, growth mindset expanded, I'm okay taking imperfect action. I'm okay making experiments and failing. It's not as risky for me these days. But all that is, when you take imperfect action, you have to be willing to take the information as feedback, right? It's not failure, it's feedback, right? And to me, that's having a mindset of resiliency, just like, okay, that was an experiment. We got information. Now let's take the information and put it back to use. What did we learn for this, and how can we move forward? And
Awesome.
did I ever doubt myself? I doubt myself all the time.
Yeah,
All
how
the
do you
time.
get rid of, or not get rid of, but like how do you manage through those doubtful, like that doubtful mind chatter that you had?
I think it's just, you know, I think as you flex this muscle, you kind of have to listen. Or at least for me, I just have to go, okay, that happened, that's real, but I'm going to choose not to listen to it. And I know if I continue to step into my growth mindset, continue to take imperfect action, I'm going to get information feedback loop that I need to continue moving forward. Whereas if I listened to that doubt all the time and took either perfect action or didn't take any action at all, I'm going to get the feedback loop the other direction. And for me, I've trained myself to thrive going the other direction towards growth than rather towards the negativity and stuff. But I think it's, we're all human, right? And I think that's, it's just part of being human. You have to retrain that part of your brain. And once you do, it'll conspire for you rather than against you.
Yeah. Yeah. The rewiring is so important, especially when it's been a habit for you for, your whole entire life. Gonna have to be patient around that transformation.
Well, and you have kids. I mean, maybe you've seen this. Like, how old are they?
They're 3 and 5.
3 and 5. Oh yeah, so you're like in the thick of it. But with my daughter, she's 10, going on 11, and especially for the like last 3 or 4 years, they're still working from their lower brain, their limbic brain, right? And so we have to, as parents, connect with them, breathe with them, teach them how to take that pause, because their whole life is in that space of being able to pause, take a breath, and bring their higher brain back online. And I think that obstacle, that doubt, that self-doubt falls into that lower brain, which kept us safe, right? It's a safety mechanism. And it's there for a reason, but we're higher functioning, creatures now. So we have to be able to breathe and bring that prefrontal cortex back online and program it to work for ourselves.
Yeah, and it's a muscle, right, that you have to kind of train and develop over time, kind of like physical working out, right? It's the same thing. You kind of do brain exercises in that way. So, yeah, totally agree. Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about what you do today with passive investing, and education around that.
Yeah, so as the director of investor education, I get to talk to investors all day long about passive real estate and help them understand their goals, their risk tolerance, their timelines for investing. And so, once you understand those three things, now it becomes easier for them to really take a look at, private equity deals, and what deals make sense for their portfolio. So, really that's what I do. Essentially, I'm on the investor relations function of the business. So I do have a deep understanding of our company's specific deals that we are offering, and I can, help investors, pick apart those deals as well and see if they're a good match for their portfolio. But largely, I'm just, I do the education and just really love talking to people and helping them, work through their various obstacles and their hesitations for actually investing in a passive investment to begin with.
Awesome. That sounds like so much fun. Cool. Well, as we wrap up, are there any nuggets of advice or lessons that you've learned that you can kind of impart on our audience here today?
One thing just kind of in preparation for the show that, I was super excited to talk about because when I saw this when I was visiting family over the weekend, and I was thinking about like, what is, some of the key lessons that I've learned in my life, and what advice would I impart, in response to that key lesson is that learning how to cast a vision, right? I was talking to my cousin this weekend, and you could see he's like you and I. He's in the blender. Life is, on him full force, and but you could see he was stuck there and hadn't really, set aside the time, even just 2 hours of his time to sit down and think about what do I want in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? Okay. Maybe that sounds scary, but even if you just think 5 years out, and even if you don't know how to do it, what do you want? Cast that vision, because if you never cast the vision, you can't start taking action towards that. You can't re engineer and go, okay, well, this is, you know, I want to buy Disney World in 5 years. Great. Then what do I need to be doing this year to prepare myself to buy Disney World, right? Like, I know that sounds like, off the wall type comment, but if you don't ever cast a vision, then you can't actually start planning out the steps that'll get you there. And so, that's really the biggest thing that I would, lay out there for people. If you haven't done it already, if you don't know, make sure to cast that vision.
I love that. And I love the example that you use because sometimes our visions are not bold enough because we're afraid to reach out way too far beyond what we know and what we think we can accomplish. So I love that you just use such a lofty vision because we should always get in the habit of thinking big and thinking really lofty and then figuring out how to get there, right? So yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
shoot for the moon, land in the stars, right?
Exactly. Awesome. Well, what's next for you, Whitney? As you educate people and get people to passively invest, what's next for you?
Yeah, so for me, I'm still focused on my own financial journey and, really in combination with that journey, like how I can create the lifestyle that I want to live now, and create an impact. So I have a couple books in the works. So I'm super excited about those coming out later this year, early next year. And yeah, just, speaking engagements and just continuing to, I joke around. My daughter's 10, going on 11. I'm like, I got about another year her liking me right now. I'm still mom or
Yeah,
mommy, so I'm gonna milk that for all it's worth.
as you should. Yeah, before they turn on you and prefer their friends over their moms. That's awesome. Um, Great. Well, how can people get in touch with you, Whitney?
Yeah, if somebody's on a similar journey or just would like to, bounce around ideas about real estate, active or passive real estate, you can reach out to me at passiveinvestingwithwhitney.com. And I've got some free goodies for everybody about how to, get into your first or next deal in passive real estate. And you can also get access to my calendar there.
Awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This was so amazing. I really appreciate your time and spending that with us today. And best of luck on your endeavors.
Thank you, Marta. It was a pleasure.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.